Welcome students. Welcome to the third session of Heredity and Evolution, Chapter 9, Class 10, in which we will study about the experiments conducted by the father of genetics, that is Gregor Johann Mendel. Children, in the first session, I told you that Mendel was the first scientist to make a systematic study of the patterns of inheritance which involved the transfer of characters from parents to progeny. He did all his experiments by using different varieties of pea plants, that is Pisum sativum, which he grew in his garden. Now the question is, why Mendel chose pea plant? He chose pea plant because this pea plant consists of at least 7 pairs of contrasting characters. I have shown all these contrasting characters in this table, like purple, white, tall and short, yellow, green, round and wrinkled, green and yellow, inflated, constricted, axial and terminal. Okay, another reason for choosing pea plant was that this pea plant is self-pollinating. And another advantage of choosing this pea plant is that many generations of pea plant can be produced in a comparatively short time span, and the study is much simpler than that of animals. So he chose pea plant. Now, how he performed experiments. Children, Mendel crossed a pure tall pea plant. In modern terms, we will consider this notation as with the genotype TT, capital TT, and he crossed this pure tall pea plant with a dwarf. Dwarf means short. With a dwarf pea plant, again pure dwarf pea plant with the genotype small tt. And surprisingly, he found that all the offsprings were tall. See, in this diagram, I have shown this is tall plant, this short pea plant, all the generations, all the offsprings in the first generation were tall. I have shown this graphically also. See, learn to represent all these cross which Mendel performed in his experiment graphically. So this is the genotype, parent's genotype. Okay, this is parent's genotype. One parent is tall, pure tall, another parent is pure dwarf. And what is the phenotype of these parents? The phenotype of this parent is tall. Phenotype of this parent is dwarf. Now at the time of reproduction, these parents, they produce gamete. In gametes, only half number of chromosomes are present, so we'll consider only single T as a gamete, or here small t as a gamete. Now at the time of fertilization, these gametes fuse together to form a new individual. Suppose this tall T gamete fuses with small t, it will result into capital T, small t, and likewise these four offsprings will be capital T, small t, capital T, small t, capital T, small t. And Mendel observed that all these F1 generation offsprings were tall. So he was surprised. In modern terms, we consider this type of cross as a monohybrid cross, because this is the cross in which we study the inheritance of one pair of contrasting characters. Okay, so let's see what happened next. Now, after completing his experiment and the result, please remember the result was F1. In F1 generation, all the plants, the resultant offsprings were tall. Okay. Then after that, uh, he made, to make his study more elaborate, he what he did, he self fertilized the F1 progeny. So F1 progeny were capital T small t. The genotype of the F1 progeny was capital T small t. So they were self fertilized among themselves, means they were fertilized among themselves. So at the time of fertilization, the gametes were produced. These gametes are, now there are two different types of gametes because their genotype is capital T and small t. So the gamete is capital T and small t. Here also capital T, small t. Now at the time of fusion, if this capital T fuses with capital T of the female or another plant, then the resultant will be capital T, capital T. And if this capital T gamete fuses with the small t gamete of the other plant, then the genotype of the resultant F2 generation progeny will be capital 2 and small t. Okay, so and see here there is one exception. If small t fuses with the small t of the other parent, then this the resultant offsprings will be small t, having genotype small t. So Mendel observed that all the that 75% of the F2 generation were tall and 25% of the F2 generation was dwarf. Means the ratio which he actually, I am going back. Uh, Okay, the ratio of the this first generation was first experiment monohybrid cross was 3:1. Mendel found that the second cross produced tall ratio dwarf pea plant in the approximate ratio of 3:1. So he concluded that the tall pea plant trait was dominant over the dwarf pea plant trait. The ratio he received was 3:1, and he concluded that tallness is dominant over dwarfness. That is why when there is a tall gene, is when tall gene is present along with this dwarfness gene, then at that time this dwarf gene could not express itself. But when the recessive gene is alone, it is not with the dominant gene, then only it could express itself. That means Mendel deduced that the height character was determined by what he called separate inherited factors. Separate means, or in see in the F1 generation all the offsprings were tall. Okay, but in because the tallness was dominant over the dwarfness. See here, there is a gene for the dwarfness, but it could not express itself. But in the second generation, the gametes, the genes, the characters, the traits present in the gametes were separated. They were segregated, and the gene for the dwarfness character express itself. So he gave he Mendel gave the first law of inheritance, and that law is known as law of segregation. Segregation means law of separation. This law of segregation states that the characteristics of an organisms are determined by the internal factors which occurs in pairs. Only one such character can be present in the single gamete. Now, these factors in the modern terms is they are known as genes. They are known as genes because genes were not discovered at the time of Mendel. They were discovered after Mendel postulated these laws, so they were named afterwards, and these factors were called as genes. These are in terms of the plants. We have shown the diagram. This is tall, this is short. Then F1 generation, all tall. Then they were self-fertilized. See the cross here. After self-fertilization, F2 generation is received, where 3 tall and 1 short, means 3:1. Okay, so this was first law of inheritance, that is law of segregation. Now Mendel was very happy. Now he thought of performing another cross, and he this cross was later on known as dihybrid cross. He In this cross, dihybrid, di means two, mono means one. So dihybrid in dihybrid cross we study the inheritance of two pairs of contrasting characters. Means in this experiment he bred plants with yellow and round peas with plants that had wrinkled and green peas. And since yellow and round were dominant over the wrinkled and green, all the offsprings had yellow and round peas. But again, means he performed a cross between two pairs of contrasting characters. What were the two pairs? One pair was round and yellow, and another pair was green and wrinkled. After crossing these two pairs of contrasting characters, means these plants having two pairs of contrasting characters, then the first generation he received were all the plants were having round and yellow peas. Okay, then uh, what he did, same method he applied, same method. He self fertilized the plants of the first generation among themselves. Okay, and found that peas were no longer either just yellow or round or green or wrinkled. Some were round, green and round, and while some were yellow and wrinkled. In F2 generation, he got the ratio 9:3:3:1. But and in this ratio, 9 were round and yellow, 3 were round and green, 3 were wrinkled and yellow, and 1 was wrinkled and green. This ratio stayed the same when hundreds of dihybrids were crossed. Why this occurred? This occurred because each of the parent only gave their offsprings one allele. Means again they are separated. Each factor, each gene assort independently, and because yellow and round were dominant traits and masked the green or wrinkled traits in the first generation, but in the second generation, all these traits they were assorted independently. So he called this experiment. After performing this experiment, he gave another law. That law is known as law of independent assortment. Mendel's second law of inheritance, that is law of independent assortment, states that in the inheritance of more than one pair of traits in the cross simultaneously, the factors responsible for each of the traits are distributed independently to the gametes. See, I'm explaining it again. These were the parent generation, round and yellow, and then this is green and wrinkled. Green is represented or showed by the small rr, and wrinkled small yy, and with the with capital letters, round and yellow is shown. So in the first generation, the gametes produced will be ry here, and here the gametes produced will be small r small y. So the fusion of gametes resulted in the all round and yellow plants. So he made he self fertilized these F1 generation plants and found the variety of gametes now. Small r y, small r capital Y, capital R Y, and capital R capital Y. Same here. Now if we multiply like this, if we multiply this ry into ry, we will get rryy. Ry into r small y, we will get ry rry small y. So in this way we can multiply and find out the progeny of F2 generation. So this plant will be round and yellow, because round and yellow is dominant. This plant will also be round and yellow, again because it is dominant. Round and yellow is dominant. But what about this plant? RR is for round, and this Y is for wrinkled. So this plant will be round and wrinkled. Sorry, round and green. Sorry, round and green. And this plant will be round and yellow, because it is dominant. What will be the phenotype of this plant? It will be and green and no, it will be wrinkled and yellow. It will be wrinkled and yellow. So in this way they got the phenotypic ratio was 9:3:3:1. So I hope you understood. Please practice this table or this cross, otherwise it will be very difficult for you to understand this. So till then, see you in the next session.